Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 889th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Geaninne Gutiérrez-Guimarães and Amanda Gluibizzi. We're thrilled to welcome poet Lara Carmen Hidalgo here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Geaninne Gutiérrez-Guimarães is Associate Curator of the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao and the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. Based in New York, she specializes in modern and contemporary Latin American art, both organizing exhibitions and collaborating on Bilbao's exhibition program. She's also involved with the Guggenheim's Latin American Circle, a committee of patrons who provide financial support for the acquisition of works by Latin American artists for the museum's collection. And our host today, former associate professor at Ohio State University, Amanda Gluibizzi, is the founding co-director of the New Foundation for Art History and ArtSeen editor for the Brooklyn Rail. She specializes in mid and late 20th century art, design, and urbanism in the United States, Europe, and Latin America. Amanda is the author of Art and Design in 1960s New York. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Amanda.
Great. Thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you, everybody, for being here today, especially on such a beautiful day. So we really, really appreciate you coming inside for a little bit to talk art with us today. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that this amazing show closes on the 10th of September in New York. So if you haven't gone to see Gego at the Guggenheim Museum yet, go now. And if you want to see it again, go now. And we'll talk about another venue, a delightful venue for it at the end of our conversation today. So make sure that you go see this show. It's a really, really wonderful experience and an amazing opportunity to see so much work by this artist. Geaninne, thank you so much for being with us today. We really, really appreciate it. What all of you don't know is that we've been trying to have this conversation basically since the show opened. So this is a really, really wonderful treat for those of us at the Rail, and we're really grateful to you for being able to squeak us in right before the show closes. We're so happy about that.
My pleasure.
So I want to start just by asking you, for those who aren't familiar with Gego, can you just give us a little bit of a background about the artist, where she was from, things like that. Just give us a little bit so that we know who we're looking at.
Of course. And hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail for this wonderful invitation, and also to our great audience who has connected with us today. It's my great pleasure to speak about Gertrude Goldschmidt today, along with my wonderful colleagues here on this great platform. Before we begin, the exhibition was co-curated between Pablo León de la Barra, who's curator at large and based in Rio de Janeiro, and myself. And the exhibition forms part of a larger international tour that started in Brazil, made it to Mexico City, then to New York, and then on to Europe. And so it has been a wonderful, I would say, last 5 years that has demanded my concentration and attention to this wonderful exhibition. And with that, I can give you a little bit of a background on this magnificent artist who is not that well known here in the United States. As I mentioned before, her full name is Gertrude Goldschmidt. She was also known as Gego, which are the first 2 letters of her first name and the first 2 letters of her last name. She was born in Hamburg, Germany in 1912. And she studied architecture and engineering at what is known today at the University of Stuttgart. She came from an affluent Jewish family, and for all intents and purposes was really on the way to becoming an architect in Germany. She graduated with her degree in 1938. However, in 1939, her, along with her family, and of course everyone else, had to flee Nazi Germany. And she was able to secure a visa to Venezuela, whereas her family secured a visa to England. She tried very hard to get a visa to join her family, but that was not possible. And so in 1939, she got on a freighter and traveled to Caracas, Venezuela, where she restarted her life. And I think what's extraordinary about this person, this woman, this artist, is that she began her life all over again in a new country, had to learn a new language, had to adapt to a new culture. And she had her architecture and engineering degree, which helped her to land the first decade in Venezuela in the 1940s. But what's remarkable is that by 1953, she decided to abandon architecture and focus on becoming an artist. And so this story here that you'll see at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, it's a story that really focuses on those 4 decades of artistic production. From the 1950s to the 1990s, in which she really, at the age of 41, began her career as an artist. And I'm glad that you're showing this picture here, Amanda, because these are her, Gego's 2 children, Tomás and Barbara Gunz, who were able to come to New York and to join us in this wonderful celebration of their mother's legacy.
That must have been so moving for them and for you as well. I'm sure that was just an incredible, incredible moment. I have a few questions that I feel like I never see answered about Gego. First of all, when did she adopt the moniker Gego? I feel like some people think it's just all the time, and some people think it was as an architect. But I'm not sure when that happens.
I would say you can consider it a childhood nickname.
Okay.
And when she was entering the artistic scene in Venezuela in the 1950s, she wanted to be called Gego more so than Gertrude Goldschmidt. And so really that name was, for all intents and purposes, her artistic name that we continue to use and honor today.
I love it. I think that's it's so smart on her part. And then I was also curious, I know that obviously she had children and she had a partner in Venezuela. Did she travel with him and them, or did she meet him in Venezuela?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when Gego traveled to Venezuela from Germany, she traveled with a lot of other emigres, German emigres, and they settled in a town where everybody was sort of there for support and for living. And she met her husband there, Ernst Gunst, and they married there, and they had their 2 kids there. Shortly thereafter, in the 1940s, she would go on to divorce Mr. Gunz, and then shortly thereafter, she met her lifelong partner, graphic designer Gert Leufert, who was another emigre born in Lithuania at that time. And so it's really interesting how she really formulated and grounded her life in Venezuela. She became a nationalized citizen. She learned the language, and I love hearing her speak in Spanish because it's with that heavy, thick German accent. She became a professor at the University of Caracas. She taught there and in other schools for about 20 years. She was really kind of in there molding the young minds of the next generation of artists. And she was able to travel between Venezuela and the US quite often. And so really being in Venezuela was sort of that next step in her trajectory. And what was happening in Venezuela at that moment was also very important to her formation. So all of that really kind of combining together.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important to remember. Of course, the United States too was so shaped by the immigrants who came during World War II. And, you know, to us now, it just seems like something that was so necessary for us, as well as for them. You know, our culture is a result of that. It's such an interesting time to study. So we're looking at images from the show right now. And I'm really curious about these. So, Chloe, could you go back to some of them from the High Gallery so that we can start there? Can you go back one more, please? Thank you. Okay, so what we're looking at here, we're seeing some of Gego's constructions, and they're hanging actually from the ceiling. And so this is one of the questions that I have for you is, obviously we've already seen some of the, I'm calling them constructions because I'm conscious of the fact that she did not like the term sculpture. But when did she start moving to thinking of them as existing in space without a base?
I would say close to the end of the 1960s and really fully in earnest in the 1970s. When we think about her artistic trajectory, and she really begins her life as an artist in 1953. She by then had moved from Caracas to Tarmas, which is a coastal town near the water. She was surrounded by vegetation and was really away from that kind of busy city life. And they're living together now with her new partner, Gert Leufert, and her two kids. She was able to concentrate on what it was to be an artist. And she started very traditionally with landscapes and architectural drawings, houses, vegetation, all of them, you know, using ink and watercolor and paper. And so really that shift between how she's focusing on these traditional subjects and that shift to this kind of abstraction or this language of abstraction that she begins to use happens, I would say, throughout the 1950s, closer to the end of the 1950s. And what we have to remember here is that Venezuela right now at this moment is undergoing through a huge, I would say, shift in their understanding and their employment of abstract art. And that shift really happens in 1948. And it really becomes very relevant in the 1950s with geometric abstraction sort of taking over. When we think about what that is, it's really it's abstraction and geometry kind of coming together and really respecting the pure line, the pure form, color, and geometry. And so this is what she's really kind of coming into as she's working out these first sculptures. And then the shift really happens in the 1960s when kinetic art starts to gain a really huge presence in the country. And as we think about kinetic art having such a wonderful history, earlier history in Europe, as well as geometric abstraction, and in 1960s, that really becomes something called cinetismo. And it's these artists in Venezuela adapting that language and really creating their own vocabulary to make these artworks. And so Gego is right in the middle of this artistic milieu, of this kind of avant-garde moment that's happening, along with other contemporary artists that are also well known, Jesus Soto, Carlos Cruz Diaz, Alejandro Otero. And although these three male artists are really, when you say their names out loud, they embody kinetic art, Gego never really fully applied that label to herself. And she really enjoyed working in the margins. And I love that about her, because it just really kind of speaks to who she was as a person, as an artist. And so just to kind of land back to your question, when she's starting to think about how she can go beyond what traditional sculpture is, and you're right to say that she didn't like to use that word. She called her work structures, because to her, these sculptures in the traditional sense they have mass, they're grounded, and she wanted to create something that would hang. She wanted to create something that had transparency, that had an airiness to it, that you can see through them and see beyond, and you can kind of be absorbed by their structure. And by chance, they happen to move as our bodies move around them. And in that essence, we activate the work becomes one with our space. And these are all of the notions, all of these concepts that she's really bringing in earnest, I would say, at the cusp of that decade, 69 to 70.
Mm-hmm. Chloe, could you go to slide 33 for us, please? Just so that we can see another view of this. So this is, I was calling it the Alcove Gallery, which is how I've always called it, but I was corrected that it's called the High Gallery in the Guggenheim. So this is right as you're starting to enter the ramp. It's the alcove space that kind of opens up at the lower part of the ramp. One of the things that's so important about this space is that, first of all, it's high, and Geaninne can tell us a little bit more about that in a moment, but also we can fully walk around some of these constructions, which is really, really important, I think, to experiencing Gego's work. So often we see them hanging and they're just in front of a wall, and so we can only get at most a 3/4 sense of the structures. But in this gallery, we're able to walk around some of them. And as you can see, particularly the ones in the middle, they would really repay walking around them fully. They do change as we walk around them. I wanted to note too that in the catalog, there's a wonderful footnote in one of the essays, and it's from a writing by Gego, and she writes, "Sculpture, three-dimensional forms of solid material," and then in all caps, "Never what I do!" exclamation point, which I thought was so funny. So we have these structures that are neither sculpture nor architecture. And so she's fully then coming up with something else. And so I'm curious about that, Geaninne. When you were working with them and working with their installation, how did they reveal themselves to you?
All wonderful observations, Amanda. And I love these works. They're just so majestic when you see them, when you're in front of them, when you are surrounded by them in this particularly space with painted white walls. I was mostly surprised at how fragile they looked, and when in some cases they're not. I loved that they had this energy and tension to them. I loved that you can really kind of understand the materiality of the works, and the use of materials really kind of carries through the sculptures that she's doing decade by decade. I think what we wanted to convey here in this high gallery, as you mentioned, it's the gallery that you enter first as you come off that first ramp. It's one of our galleries that has very tall ceilings. The other one is on the ramp 6, the last ramp. And it's a really beautiful space, room, in a sense that allows us, the curators, to really play with it and come up with different things that function as a sort of an outside moment of the exhibition. And our exhibition follows a largely chronological order. If you think about, there are 5 ramps, and each ramp focuses on a certain decade of her lifetime, from the 50s to the 90s. But the High Gallery offers us this moment where we don't have to follow that chronology, where we can really use that space to showcase who Gego was in an instant to the visitor. And our idea, along with my colleague and curator, Pablo, we envisioned using this space in a way that would create an immersive, or even kind of an interactive way to look at her sculpture. And we worked really closely with our exhibition designer, Kelly Cullinan, who is also an architect, and she's absolutely fabulous. And initially, we wanted to bring from Venezuela one of Gego's masterpieces, which was the Reticularia, which was an environmental site-specific installation that she had done in 1969, and that exists in the permanent collection of the museum, and it's currently undergoing reservation. And so because we weren't able to show that, we still stayed with that idea of how can we use the space to really introduce who Gego was, and the idea of creating this center island with these very tall sculptures that wouldn't necessarily fit within our other ramps, because our ceilings in our other ramps are only 9 feet tall, and most of these sculptures that you see in the High Gallery, some of them go from 12 feet to 14 feet tall. And then to create these platforms that are on the periphery of the gallery space, and to create this pathway that would guide the visitor to move and shift around the space, so that you're really able to understand and see and appreciate the multiple perspectives that you can gain from moving around these structures. And so that really was very pleasant to do together with my colleague and with an incredible team that we have here. And there is a moment on the second ramp that we call it the overlook, which gives you another instance to see into the High Gallery. And there you are really kind of coming really close to the hanging mechanisms of that sculpture, of those sculptures, and it offers you another kind of moment to really appreciate the magnificence that Gego was created at this time.
Chloe, I think slide 32 might suggest a look over into that gallery, but I could be wrong.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
When you're installing them, of course, not so much the ones that are sitting, but the ones where you might have to hang them or to install them on the wall. How different are they every time they're installed? I mean, do you have to make choices about that sort of stuff? Do you have to like put them back into place, or are they pretty solid but delicate?
So I would say for this exhibition, we worked really closely with our models, with our maquettes for many, many years, really closely together with our exhibition designer, with our team of conservators, our team of registrar, and really to kind of understand what these objects were, how big they were. We really relied heavily on the archival information from Fundación Gego, the Artist Foundation, in sending us images and information even before we were able to finalize the checklist. And so it required, I would say, various years to really pin down what that checklist was within this space, and to then work on how these works would be placed within our Frank Lloyd Wright architecture, with its many challenges that brings, in a good way, in a way that really kind of challenged our minds while we were installing. And so when we started the installation process, I would say roughly 3 to 4 weeks before opening day, we have the entire museum team, we have prepared for years for this moment to come. And we know exactly where each piece is going. In our minds, it works, in the models, it works. But that also, it's okay to make changes at the end as well. You know, you kind of are reacting with the space, with the pieces, and you want to allow yourself that flexibility as well. And I think for us, the works that were very straightforward are the works on paper that go on the wall framed, or the sculptures that go on the base. The more challenging works, of course, which is a majority, are the works that hang from the ceiling. We had to determine or study and analyze which works hang from one single point like this one, which works hang maybe from 2 points or 3 points, sometimes 4 points, and really work with our entire team, height and distance, and how can we bring these sculptures out from the wall into the visitor space, knowing that we have our ramps that are ascending, that we have to give way to traffic, to our visitors, but we also want them to really have a full experience of enjoying these sculptures. And so together with our exhibition design team, we were able to create these series of platforms that would extend away from the architecture, because it is architecture that we can't touch, and really kind of making it a seamless extension, I would say. And of course, the background is white. It's the Frank Lloyd Wright white that we all adhere to, and that worked in our favor as well. One of the constant preoccupations that we had was, will the structures that hang with their very thin metal aluminum wire, will they disappear in the space? And that was something that was very constant, very present. And at the end, I think, what a delight to see that they were able to coexist in a very symbiotic way with the architecture. And it was just one of those wonderful results that happened that we could only see at the very end. And so, yeah.
I was struck by that too, that as you look across the ramps, you know, over the atrium, you can still see the structures that are hanging. You would not think you would be able to, because they're so fine, and yet they hold their own in that space in a really, really interesting way. And I think that must at least be in part because she was trained as an architect, and so she was fully aware of space and how to command it in a way that, for example, I as an art historian would not be able to intuit. You know, I'm able to appreciate it, but not able to do it myself. One of the things that you mentioned was her material. And as you know, this is a question that I was really, really curious about. We're looking at this piece right now. It's a drawing without paper, which is such an interesting thing to think about, especially in terms of materiality. And it's made of steel, plastic, and copper. But we've already seen in some of the slides that she was using materials like iron and aluminum. And so could you talk a little bit about her materiality and your understanding of her practice using these different materials?
Of course, and I think it will be wonderful if we can shift to an earlier slide where we can see those earlier sculptures where she's using welding. And the material is iron. Yeah, like one of those, yeah. And so I love that question, Amanda, because it really, when we see her work from the earlier period to her later period, I mean, she undergoes a huge transformation, and most importantly, in the use of her materials. Where she's really, I would say, zoning in on that aspect of materiality for each of these works. And so when 59, 60, she is concentrating on these earlier works, we can tell right away that she's particularly using iron. And it's painted iron, most of them black, some white. Along the way, we see other colors like blue or red. But what strikes me about these earlier works, and I saw it when I saw all of the sculptures together on site, is her use of a welder and her use of welding these materials. And it's more, I would say, prevalent in some sculptures than others. And for example, here, and along the way, in order to create this, she had to rely on the assistance of others, right? But you can clearly see that she yearned to want to be autonomous. Also, another aspect of this, and if we think about what's happening in Venezuela when she's going in 1939 to the 1940s, it's, you know, a booming oil industry. They're modernizing, they're industrializing their urban areas, and there's this kind of rawness to that material that they're using that kind of carries out through the decades. And this is what she's really kind of coming into as she's working as a freelance architect until 1949, 1950. And so what's wonderful then, her shift to another material, I would say in the 60s, you can see that she shifts to using aluminum, and in particular aluminum wire. There we go. Or maybe there's another one there, but in these instances, here we go. When she's using these, she's able now to use her own hands and really manipulate that material. And in manipulating that material, she's able to bend, she's able to connect, she's able to knot, she's able to construct with her own hands, no longer in need of that welder. And that, in essence, then transforms the way that she is also installing them, right? And your quote about how she doesn't do a traditional sculpture, that she's doing these structures, this airy form, this fragility, the attention to gravity, this tension, all of that kind of, I would say, highlights the use of this materiality. And not only with the sculptures, you know, she was also a great printmaker, a great draftsperson. Not a lot of people know she created over 2,000 works on paper in her lifetime. So she was not just a sculptress in that sense. And so I would say that she, in her 4 decades of artistic production, she really worked across medium, with the exception of painting. But it's really interesting to see that the foundation of her training as an architect, as an engineer, the language of math, geometry, all of that is sort of at the root of what she is creating throughout her lifetime.
And how much do you think she was willing to leave to chance?
Oh, I think she loved it. I think throughout the decades, it becomes more and more, she becomes more and more open to that notion of leaving it to chance. And you can see it, right? Like those earlier structures are very solid. They're required, on the base, they're rigid in their structure. Then you go into this moment where, she's creating these reticular typologies, so using the grid, the net, the mesh, the form based on the triangle and the square, but still within that form is contained, right? Then we get into the 80s and the 90s, and I think, I love to say that she becomes free of form, and she embraces sort of this collapse of geometry, or this deformation of geometry, and chance and chaos sort of take over in the way that she wants to. I love looking at this bicho, which means bug, from 1987. And if you look at that first 1957 sculpture, when it's welded and curved and precise here, she still maintains the reticular grid. She still maintains the form, but it's this kind of deformed geometry, and I love that. I love that it's sort of this chaotic assemblage,
I love this piece too. I love the idea of, like maybe it's under your bed, and then you get out of bed one day and like you get all tangled up in it and stuff, and you're like, oh, the bicho got me. Thinking about the bichos, of course, that is the name as well of a really important series of constructions by Lygia Clark. And I was curious about that. Do you think that Gego was aware of the bichos by her Brazilian colleague?
I love Lygia Clark. I have received this question many times, and I love the way that Gego's artwork is able to connect to a different artist from a different time, who is also working out abstraction in her own way. Lygia Clark and Gego, I would say, are both wonderful artists in their own right, each of them creating incredible artwork in their respective countries. The bichos that you're referring to, Amanda, Lygia Clark created in the 1960s. And so there is historically, I would say roughly a 25 to 30 year gap, right? So that's something to keep in mind. The word bicho also, we can relate it to a critter, a bug, and so that element is present. But what I would say, there is a big difference in Lygia Clark's bicho and in Gego's bicho, in the sense that Lygia Clark, also coming out of geometric abstraction, in the early 1950s, coming out of concrete art, that's sort of having a big moment in South America, and realizing, I would say, 1959, that the term neo-concrete art is taking place. The neo-concrete art manifesto is taking place, and we think about Elio Itisica and Ligia Pape and all those other artists from Brazil from that period. And what that meant was that the object itself could only become alive if it had the participation of the spectator. And so Lygia Clark's bichos, in a sense, are these metallic, highly geometric sculptures that bend and fold with the help of a viewer or a visitor. And in so doing, that person, that visitor, is activating the work, and you become one with the work, and the work becomes one with you. And that was really the essence of neo-concrete art. And so in that sense, historically, they are drastically different.
Yes.
But what I do love is that there is a way to link them together when you think about why are these artists really focusing on utilizing names for animals or natural elements in their practice. And I think if I can speak for both of them, it's really when Geg was working on her series Chorros, which are streams, or Troncos, which are tree trunks, or Bichos, which are bugs, she's trying to, in a way, link the functionality with the form. And that becomes very prevalent with the streams and with the trunks. But with the Bichos, there's another way in Venezuela, in the Spanish vocabulary, that it could also mean little nothing, or it could also mean something that is insignificant. So it's a bug, and also something that is something, or something that is nothing. And I want to focus on that a little bit more, because here she's creating these very chaotic configurations that are sort of left up to chance, and she's calling them little nothings, but they are something. And so I think that's really wonderful if we want to think about it in that way. But I do love that connections made between across artists and across geographies and timelines. I love that.
I really love the way that you described these things, these little like somethings that are nothings. It reminds me very much of Kafka, and you know, when he's describing Odradek and the cares of the family man. Walter Benjamin says that it's the form which things assume in oblivion, which feels so appropriate here. So thank you for that wonderful description. Ooh, I love it. One of the things you mentioned in your answer was just the way that Gego's work can kind of speak to other artists across time. And so we were looking at Clark, of course, who was a somewhat, she was kind of a contemporary, but the works that we were talking about were made earlier. But we could also think about the way that Gego's work can talk to artists working today. When I first saw the show, I felt so lucky. It was coinciding with the Cersei show at the Guggenheim and also the Nick Cave show. Three artists who are working distinctly differently and in ways that are specific to themselves. And yet all three artists' work as installed at the Guggenheim seemed so interested in each other. And so I'm really, really curious about this. How do you think that Gego's work can inform contemporary art? What do you think she can offer to contemporary artists working right now?
I love that question. It's a tough question, I think. You know, when I look at her artwork and I look at her artistic trajectory, I am amazed and still am amazed that she was able to just produce so much and constantly evolving and constantly, I would say, creating her own form of pictorial vocabulary. You can zone in on any particular series. The one that we're looking at right now is called Tejedura, or weaving, where she cut down strips of paper and she interweaves or interlaces them together to create these wonderful abstract compositions. And these are the last series of works on paper that she'll do before her death in 1994. And she happens to be doing them in a moment where she's recovering from an injury and she's bedridden in that sense. And so I see her and I see the amount of work that she produced towards the end, even with her bichos and bichitos, and even with the series Drawings Without Paper. And it is an abundance. It is a robust collection of things. And in that sense, I think about how other artists are also constantly producing, constantly creating their own language, creating their own mark in art history, whether it's modern and contemporary. And I love that her exhibition had moments with Zara Z and with Nick Cave, and now we've just opened a new exhibition on contemporary Korean art, and all of these artists and even the group show you really appreciate the sense of materiality. Each of them, Sarah Z with her technology and her look at all of these wonderful notions of memory and time, and Nick Cave, with that socio-political rich history that really transforms his work, especially with his the fashion suits that he had there. I remember one particular visitor saying how she enjoyed looking at Gego's troncos, which are those column-like sculptures, in Nick Cave suits. And I thought, oh my gosh, I would have never thought that, but it's this verticality and monumentality and interest in materiality that each of these artists are honing in and elevating and really uplifting in their artistic production. And so for me, that's what it is. It's really kind of opening up connections that we wouldn't have been open to necessarily, or being open to these different types of conversations and dialogues that may have happened by chance. And I'm very happy for that. I'm very proud of that. And then at the end, really, the takeaway for us is showing our audience who this artist is and who this artist was, and the impact that this artist had in art history, in a narrative that is very much rooted in modern and contemporary Latin American art history, right? That often does not get shown or is often marginalized in that sense. And so really to bring this German Venezuelan artist to our space, I think is also very, very important.
Yeah, it's a wonderful way of kind of reconceptualizing the Guggenheim. You know, we think about it as a spiral, but in fact, with the Gego show, it's a double helix, right? Mm-hmm. It's spinning around things, and other things are spinning around it at the same time. It's a really, really wonderful way of conceptualizing this artist, and one that I think, given what I saw of her work, she would definitely respond to.
I think so. I with my colleague Pablo and our team, while we were installing, we always, of course, challenges with Frank Lloyd Wright, and he was like, oh, Frank Lloyd Wright. But then at the end, we were like, oh, Frank Lloyd Wright and Gego would have loved each other, and and she would have appreciated all of these things. And I think at the end, it really works. The rotunda, the spiraling ramps, it offers us a very unique way to see artwork in that space. And for Gego, with her hanging sculptures, with those hanging structures, you're able to take a moment at any point in across the ramps and really get a holistic sense of how she began, where she was up to, and how she ended. And that is unique to the building. And I appreciate that about our building, because it's really within their challenges, it really brings a very different and fresh perspective to look at art and to appreciate art in a very distinct way.
I love that, right as you said, oh, Frank Lloyd Wright, Chloe stopped on the weaving that had all that hot pink in it, and it reminds me, of course, that one of the early conceptions of the Guggenheim was that it would be hot pink. Sometimes I wish that could have been the case. Wouldn't that have been amazing? Yeah. So this show has been one that you've worked on for now years and years and years. And so what comes after once the show is closed on September 10th? What comes after for you and for the show?
So this exhibition, once it closes down, it will travel to the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, where we will be able to present Gego in all of her glory once again in Spain. The last exhibition of Gego in Spain was in 2006, when it was exhibited at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona. And so it's really, I would say, significant and important to bring this history back to our Bilbao audience, to our international audience that visits Bilbao on a yearly basis, and to continue telling her story, to show her legacy, and to really ground that story in 20th century art history. And so that's really one of the next things that I'm working on right now. We're finishing the Spanish version of an edited down book, and working on the layout and all of the other exciting elements that will come with a museum, such as an audio guide, a lecture, a conference, etc. And what's amazing is that my colleagues in Bilbao have come to see the show, and they are so excited to receive the show, and I'm really looking forward to installing it once more in Bilbao come this November.
Wow, it's been such a whirlwind for this show. Talk about kinetic art, right?
Yes.
Well, congratulations again. This is an enormous achievement, and I feel exceptionally lucky that I was in New York and alive and relatively well able to walk up the ramp and experience this show. So congratulations to you and your colleagues, and thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everybody for joining us and really for allowing us to share with you a lot of our stories. And I'm really thankful to our museum team, to our directors, to our chief curators who really worked on the show with us, and a special thanks to my co-curator, Paolo, who couldn't be with us in New York today, but again, always very present in the exhibition. And I really feel very lucky to be here amongst you today. So thank you for the invitation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Chloe, we'll send it back to you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Geaninne and Amanda, for that really brilliant dialogue. That was such a pleasure to listen to. We do have several questions from the audience. And the first one is from Susan. Susan, I'm going to give you a chance to unmute.
I'm not on the screen for some reason, but I adored the show, by the way, and congratulations to the curators. I've seen it twice, and you're reminding me that it closes on the 10th. I'm going to try to go tomorrow night. But I'm very interested in this artist. I discovered her when there was a South American, Latin American show of women artists at the old Whitney location. This is a number of years ago. And I've been following her work ever since. But it's the question about her transition from Germany, where she fled because she was Jewish, because her whole family would have been killed. And that she, this is not brought up. I mean, when you say this name, I think she was hiding her religion, because Goldschmidt, it's easily German and easily Jewish. Gertrude, the same. It's not a Spanish word. I don't know. I wish I could ask her what it was like to make the transition. I couldn't find this anywhere. When I've looked it up online, they say, we don't know. She didn't talk about it. But someone knows. I mean,
it's an important question, Susan. And it's true, she wouldn't talk about it. I also, in the archives, looked for and searched for, I was able to find this wonderful interview that she did in the 1970s that's has now been translated into English, and it was published by the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. By the way, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston were among the first institutions in the United States to give Gego an exhibition, and that was as early as 2002. She had died in 1994. And then again in 2005, they devoted another exhibition to her. But since then, we haven't really had another major exhibition of hers in the US. And so, yes, she was extremely private. Very rarely do we get to hear from her. There's an interview that she did in 1977 with Juan Downey. And when I think, you know, they try to talk about that, and, you know, she just talks about other things. But what I can say is that for her, getting that visa was crucial and important for her survival. And she was deeply thankful for obtaining it through the help of her school, university professors who were writing letters to everybody who could get her a visa. And that is written in a catalog that the Museum of Hamburg did not too long ago, where they focus on her university life as an architecture student, and I love reading that essay. But in this interview, what's really interesting, the one that she did in the 1970s, you know, she does recap that moment where she knew she just had to leave or everybody would perish. And she talks about, you know, getting on that freighter. She talks about packing up the bags and leaving. And she talks about her parents having to leave first. And then she talks about restarting her life. And so I think it's an important biography to understand. She could have gone anywhere, right? And I think Venezuela was not one of the countries that she was looking to go to. She really wanted to go to England, but it was the one that became available. And I'm glad that it did, because she really became part of that history and became such an important force in that narrative of modernism in Venezuela and in Latin America. And you know, her story is able to sort of become alive through all of these different exhibitions that have gone throughout from the moment that she died until now.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer, Geaninne, and thank you for that incredibly generative question, Susan. The next question is from Patricia in the audience, and I am going to ask on Patricia's behalf. Geaninne, Patricia's wondering, do you have a sense of how many of Gego's structures were worked out on paper first versus how many were created on the fly or with her intuition?
So that's an excellent question. So Gego did not, so all of her works on paper are unique works on paper. She didn't do preparatory sketches or preparatory drawings. I think the only exception to this was when she was working on public projects that were commissioned by the city of Caracas, in which you can see in our show, she was able to sort of create these prep sketches. But overall, she was creating these unique works on paper, from watercolors to ink on paper to prints. And she wouldn't prioritize one medium over the other. She really would work on them, I would say, in parallel to, or at the same time, simultaneously. It was actually a beautiful dialogue that she would have between what she was able to create on a flat two-dimensional surface and what she was able to create with three-dimensional form, and back and forth. She often spoke about how she was trying to really kind of encapsulate that idea. And I think this comes very relevant in her drawings from the 1960s, when you go to the exhibition and you see that on that second ramp, and it's really kind of at the cusp of kinetic art, and she's creating these drawings with ink, with a lot of lines, as she calls them, parallel lines that are parallel to one another, not touching, but overlapping and juxtaposed to create this sort of optical illusion or optical effect, to give us a sense of movement. And so how can she translate that into a three-dimensional form? And she does that through the sculptures that we start to see at the very beginning, and that you're able to sort of absorb that kind of effect as you go around. And another anecdote to that is that she really enjoyed both her works on paper and sculptures to give as much importance to that negative space as much as the space that the line occupied. Because to her, it was all sort of coming together to create whatever composition she was working on. But she was an incredible artist in the sense that she produced a lot. And even when we think about the numbers, there is a lot. And so I think for us, the task was, how do we edit that down to really tell a very concise and cohesive story? It was very, very challenging, because as a curator, and Amanda knows, as an art historian, as we're writing an essay or as we're creating an exhibition, we just want to show the audience everything. But we also must become editors ourselves and narrow down that scope so that the audience can really grasp whatever story we're trying to tell.
Patricia, thank you so much for that amazing question. And Geaninne, thank you for that answer. The next question is for me. I was curious, one of the things that surprised me as I worked through the exhibition were the photographs of Gego and the portraits of her. And I was curious, it made me think about her own relationship to her legacy and how she thought about her archive. And I was curious if you could speak to that, or if you came up against any information about that in creating the exhibition.
Those photographs were taken by her lifelong partner, Gerd Leufert, between 1984 and 1989. So you can see in the pictures she's a little older. And these were intimate portraits that her partner was taken of her in their home, which also functioned as their studio space. And it's a larger, I would say, set of photographs that belongs to the Gerd Leufert estate. And we were very thankful for them to lend it to us. And the set of photographs became a publication. They were exhibited in Venezuela during their lifetime. And what we don't see in the selection of photographs that we have are the gatherings that she had with all the artists and all the people in the artistic scene. Gego's home was really kind of a hub where everybody would come and be together and join in these conversations. And if we think about, she was much older than her contemporaries, Jesus Soto, Cruz Diaz, Otero. So they had a very different relationship in terms of how she was perceived as, she came from Europe already trained with that history to Venezuela. And you have Jesus Soto, Cruz Diaz, and Otero going to Paris, to Europe, to be exposed to international art, and then bringing all of that to Venezuela, and all of that radicalizing that shift from traditional to abstraction. And so all of that really is kind of coming together. And what I love about this set of photographs is, giving a face and a voice to an artist that we often may not get to see in an exhibition. Gego, when she exhibited for the first time in New York in 1969 at the Center of Inter-American Relations, which is now the American Society, used her name, Gego, and there was a review, I think, in the New York Times in 1969 saying, Gego, he's a great artist. And so, you know, there was always this confusion as to, you know, is she female or male artist? And I think she loved that. And for us, you know, it was really kind of paying respect, paying homage to the artist, to really showcasing a very intimate moment that is happening with her lifelong partner. And I love those pictures of her in her studio, still creating, still kind of, you know, working with her cats, you know, taking a siesta in her hammock, you know, and also just those beautiful views of Caracas that she was able to kind of see on an everyday basis. And it was really, it also functions as a visual pause from the exhibition to really kind of ground into a little bit more of who she was. I think at some point we thought about, do we put quotes of the artist somewhere along the walls? You know, how else can we evoke her voice? But that proved to be a little too much. And so with this, it was really kind of a very elegant way to signal to who she is and who she was.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer to my question. The last question today is going to be from Phong Bui, our publisher and artistic director. Phong, Phong's gonna come on this screen to ask.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I showed the show twice and definitely will come back maybe
Great.
tonight. Yeah, thank you so much. It's an immense contribution, I would say, to young sculpture. A lot of my graduate students have gone to see it, and I appreciate deeply, definitely. Yeah, I have one short question, which somehow about 2 years ago, in our NSE, as you are now with us, we celebrated, you know, Augusto de Campos' 90th birthday. So he tuned in from Sao Paulo with a lot of fans and friends and admirers, and a huge turnout to celebrate him, which brings to mind the idea of concrete poetry. Because he's one of the founder, and a little bit somewhat older than Augusto was Eugene Göringer, who was born in Germany, a little bit older than him, German born, but lived in Bolivia, one of the great poet, founder of concrete poetry. Why was my question? Don't want to lose the thread here. Somehow I do, you know. No, it's just that, you know how sometimes older artists might text a little bit of younger artists. You know, Miro been in New York a few times. I think he died in 1983. But he had seen abstract expression. I mean, no, I don't mean the abstract expression. That's not the right way to describe Rothko and Bonnet Newman, who both died in 1970. But definitely, when you look at Miro works in the 60s onward, there's a lot of floating monochromatic field color, and then a few spot of shapes or constellation might appear. So my question is that I wonder if Gego have read and be mindful of concrete poetry, and have there was a relationship, was there a rapport with them?
I love that question. And you know, I have to say, I didn't find any kind of correlation between Gego's artistic practice and concrete art, but that doesn't negate the fact that she would have been aware of that. Concrete art had such a huge presence in South America. In Latin America, you know, we have Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, Cuba. And so I think that in other countries, I think that definitely there was such a rich history between geometric abstraction and concrete art and neo-concrete art, and how these artists from different regions and different geographies are really kind of reacting and adapting to it. I do have to say, though, that she did collaborate with other graphic art design artists who were publishing books of poetry. And the one that does come to mind is this Venezuelan artist Alfredo Silva Estrada, who wrote a poem of Gego's work in 1979. And this was not the first time that Silva Estrada collaborated with Gego. In that book of poetry, Gego accompanied the book with her own illustrations. And the book really talks about her reticular forms, and it talks about how the concept of infinity, the concept of bounded time, the concept of how Gego is attempting to measure infinity, and how all of that is really paradoxical because you cannot attain time and space in that sense. And when I read that, me and my colleague, when we read that and thinking about what the title of the show would be, because we had no titles, we thought, wow, you know, here we have Gego doing these sculptures, always in her mind wanting to showcase them against a white background, oftentimes on top of a white floor, so that you can really, at least at the symbolic level, attempt to see through her work and see an infinite space beyond. And here we have Alfredo Estrada Silva, who's saying she's doing that. And in her own way, you know, she's trying to measure something that is immeasurable. And so I do like to say that there is a correlation between her and these poets in Venezuela that are happening at the same time, whether they are being inspired by her own forms and structures, or she's collaborating with them in response to their poetry. But it is a nice segue to understanding how we came to that title. And when we came to that title, it was a eureka moment for all of us at the museum, because we thought, that's it, that's the one. And it just carries so much history and so much weight to it. But I do love that connection, yeah.
Yeah, you know, after all, it's concrete art that inspired concrete poetry. Concrete art emerged in the 50s, and concrete poetry emerged in the 60s. So it's interesting to think in that context, you know.
Yes.
Wow, I love her drawings too. I love her drawing, which is another panel together, right, Amanda? We have to go back to that, because I love to be able to talk and ask questions about chance operation, no revision needed in the drawing and whatnot. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geaninne and Amanda. And thank you everyone in the audience today for those just incredibly brilliant questions. We have a tradition at the Rail of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our Poet Laureate of the day, Lara Carmen Hidalgo, to the stage. Lara Carmen Hidalgo is a poet and photographer based in New York. She graduated with an MFA from Bard College in 2023. Her work inhabits collections at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Yale, and the National Museum of Women in the Arts, among others. Her recent publication, Vegetative Delirium, traces parallel ecological, technological, personal, and geopolitical lineages of the Mekong Delta and the American War in Vietnam. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Lara.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Eleanor and Geaninne and Amanda for that really compelling talk. I'm really so happy to be here for this particular reading. I'm gonna read from my recent publication, Vegetative Delirium. Please feel free to email me if you'd like a copy of it. I've been mailing them out to people I know, and I'll send you a copy. So yeah, I think the reading time can vary, so I'm just gonna set a timer for 8 minutes and I'll stop when it goes off. Okay. They come in anger, asphalt skin, hacked converters, tonnage, forked buckets rasping concrete, extracting perpetuities, tantrums, men having edited themselves to come, born of deeper graves, throw, trench sludge, in mass burials. They grew so fascinated of as to command control. In the name of the light and the corruption of filesings in manholes, exploding, of corrosion, in combustion and mufflers, in the difference between a thing and its absence, it's not. In the absence of sight coming from eyes, or hearing from ears, or sense in the lapse of belief, in breath of dying. In the restful plurality, hopeful of epilogues, in dusk of branches swaying, easy, lustful. But in light, in anger, you didn't want them. You could not have begun to imagine them. You would have only seen them brilliant, scintillating conspiratorially, voluminously shaded, splintering as if sensate, optical, striping asphalt, July, deep fryer of streets. And I'll just show you what it looks like on the page. So that's what I just read, and then this part here. Albizia Julibrisen. Albizia Julibrisen, you bastard tamarin. Fucking think you're some kind of mimosa. I could watch this ballet and listen to the ice cream truck go by all goddamn day, and you wouldn't say a thing, you fucking phony. Now I'm gonna read this page. What is it that I'd not been being told all along about how constraints self-propagate as by inertia? That for me to be here as I am is to be in a hallucinatory space of convulsion. My mother, she had always spoken of the jungle. But then what were you to make of jungle if your mother said it? Were you then to say it wasn't real? She has always spoken of the jungle. In what remain of my mother's bare memories of Vietnam are the Montagnards' gifts. The Montagnards whose babes, her mother, my grandmother, Ba, midwife. In appreciation for Ba's work, the Montagnards would send her home to my mom, Medium, she was then called, and her many siblings with pet monkeys, puppies, tropical birds, turtles, fresh white tiger meat, and their pelts. Medium's family had a country home at the foot of those mountainous jungles where the montagnards of various ethnic groups indigenous to the Central Highlands have lived, mountain dwellers, the French called them, since around the 9th century. Midi's more humored recollections from the childhood she left involve characters like the enormous turtle she rode around the patio of her uncle's stilt house on a lake, and her clever klepto pet monkey gifted by those montagnards Ba worked for. Of their jungles, Midi remembered lying in bed at night listening to elephants trumpeting higher up on the mountain. She feared opening her eyes. The dark was so extreme there, she couldn't see her own hands. She told me the jungles were decimated by the US use of Agent Orange and napalm during the Vietnam, or what in Vietnam is called the American War. She had witnessed the devastation herself when, as a teenager in 1974, her uncle, working for the US State Department, sent her and other Vietnamese teens of the diaspora, some from France and Australia, on a tour of the country through the jungles to read poetry to the South Vietnamese army to boost the troops' morale. I never thought too hard about the obliteration of monkeys, tigers, and elephants that she most often lamented after hearing her sporadically recall experiences from that trip. It sounded like she'd been lucky to have made it out alive. It was easy for me to think, at least the forest must have grown back. And yet when I visited the Mekong Delta earlier this year, I couldn't help but too often notice the actually eerie absence of animals, the disappearance, their absence, that peculiar silence, stretched over days of traveling through verdant landscapes, even national preserves, resounded in me as a kind of requiem, not only for the animals in the forest that had been, but for the many people killed, maimed, starved, poisoned, permanently disfigured, and over the course of decades, permanently sickened and robbed of memory by the United States spraying Agent Orange and systematically setting people, whole villages, forests, and farms on fire with napalm. And then that's and I'll just read one more brief section. This one is edges, tensions, subverting frictions, tensions, vectors of fiberglass, asbestos, every excrescence of you, inclusive likely body parts, scalpeled matrices, polyurethane, cilia, jitters, a blade, a laser's edge in this ceremonial spritzing. Exhaust precipitates, mutagen, particulate. Thank you.
Wow, Lara, that was so powerful. Thank you so much for reading to conclude today's program. And
Thank you, Chloe.
yeah, it's truly, thank you so much. And thank you, Geaninne. Thank you, Amanda. Special thanks to Ivy at the Guggenheim team, who really was so supportive in preparing for today's event and making it possible. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And if you're free on Monday, join us for an Ode to Maya Deren, a screening series in collaboration with our friends at the Filmmakers Cooperative, featuring 5 films by Darren. You can register to receive a 24-hour access link to the films on Monday. And as is real tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you, everyone. Thank you, Geaninne. Thank you, Lara.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Chloe.
you.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And go see the show.
Thank you. Yeah, congratulations. And go see the show.
Yeah, well, it's in New York.
And thank you for the beautiful reading.